Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another Java tutorial, and in this tutorial we are going to be covering methods. Now, what is a method? Well, a method is essentially a reusable block of code that you can execute from anywhere depending on what your access modifier is. And you don't have to keep copy pasting the same code over and over and over again. So let's get started. We have a lot to cover. So first things first, let's examine this fresh template that we have here that we've been so accustomed to. Excuse me. Okay, so you can see we have public, static, void, main, string, args. This is a method. This is the main method that Java executes by default for you. You can see it has an access modifier, public. It has another modifier, static, and then it has void, main, and then stuff inside of these parentheses. If we were to break this down, public and static are the access modifiers. So a method is constructed like this, right? We have our access modifiers, then we have whatever the return type of the method is. So in public static void main, in that case, void is its return type. Void means it doesn't return anything. Hence why we don't have a return statement inside of this method. However, you can have a method return whatever you want. You can have it return an object of some kind. You can have it return a string, an int, a double, a float, whatever. You can have it return almost anything. Well, basically anything. So, and then you have the return type. All right. Then you have the method's name. So this can be whatever you want. Usually you're going to want the method name to represent what it does. So if you want a method that prints hello world to the console, your method is probably going to be called print hello world. If you want to have a method that generates a list of items, or like it generates an array of items, your name for that method is going to have to relate to that action that you want to execute within that method. So the name, and then we have what we call the parameter list. What is a parameter list? Well, a parameter list is where we give our method extra information to work with. So, for example, if we want to create a method that prints whatever we want, and combines them into one giant string, for example, that the parameter list is where you give that method that extra information of, hey, this is what I want you to combine into this one string, and then I want you to print that combined string out. So then we have the parameter list, and then we have its body as well. So its body, right? So that's the basic construction of a method. let's put it into action. First things first is a method that doesn't contain any parameters. You don't pass it any extra information, and doesn't return anything. How would we do this? Well, let's make this a public static void. So this is public. You can access it from anywhere, and it's void, so it doesn't return anything. Then we're going to say print hello. Don't give it any information. Just have empty parentheses there, and then give it a body. Inside of the method body, we're going to go system out print ln, and inside of quotation marks, hello. Just like that. And if we call this method, how do we call it? How do we execute this method? Well, we just say print hello, and then we give it opening and closing parentheses and a semicolon. That is how we call a method, locally anyway. So we go ahead and save this and run it. You can see we get hello down in the console. Pretty cool, right? Now, what if we want to pass this function something? What if we want to give it extra information? Well, let's go ahead and rename this function to print. Just print. We can tell it to print something. So we'll say string, for example. We'll call it str. And we want this function, or this method, to print whatever the user passes in. So we take that str parameter and put it inside of the print line method of system.out. And so when we call it up here, we give it a value of hello. So we go ahead and save it and we run it. You can see we get the same result. Now, keep in mind, these parameters can be whatever you want. They can be an object, so you can reference methods from that object or properties from that object. It can be an integer, it can be a double, it can be a float, it can be a char, it can be whatever you want. And you don't have to just include one. You can also include another parameter as well. It can be the same type, it can be a different type, it doesn't matter. So we'll say string str2, we'll call it. And we'll call this, and we'll change the name to combine and print. So what this will do is it will combine those two strings. So string combined string equals str plus str2, so that combines them. And then we want to print out combined string, just like that. We save it and we run it. We get an error because we didn't change the function name up here, or I should say the method name. So combine and print. We'll say hello world. And so now we should see hello world without any spaces in between once we save it and run it. And that's exactly what we see. Pretty cool. Now, what if we want to return a value? What if we want to return a value and assign it to a variable when we call it, for example? Well, where we have void here, we can give it a we can give it a different type. And let's say that we want this to return a string where we want this to combine. We only want this to combine two strings. And we don't want it to print anything. Well, we can do that. So, as you can see here, this method, public static, so it's public and you can access it from anywhere. It returns a string. Its name is combine, and then we give it two strings that we want it to combine, and then in order to fulfill the return type, we need to return something that is of the return type. In this case, combined string is a string, which is exactly the type that we need to return. So we're going to return combined string, just like that. And we can go system out print line, and we'll pass the function or method call into the print ln method. Why does this work? Well, because it returns a string, it'll just treat it as a string. So combine, and then inside of those parentheses, we're going to say hello, comma, and then inside of second pair of quotations, we put world. Right? So then we can go ahead and put a semicolon at the end of that. Go ahead and save this and run it. We still get hello world, just like we expected. Because combine returns a string, so therefore it just interprets it as a string. That's why that works. You could also return stuff without any extra data. You'll find that quite often when you're dealing with models for data, when you're like getting JSON data from the internet. When you're doing that, you're going to have to create objects that represent the data you get back, and you'll have to have setter and getter methods, as we call them, to set and get those certain properties. When you parse it, when you parse the data and whatnot, you convert it and all that. That's a real world use case for these types of methods. That you're gonna have to use methods for. Methods can also be used for like utilitarian purposes. So you can have utility functions that for example, say generate a random number, and returns that random number, so you can use it as a key for a list or something of that nature. You can calculate a tip that way, for example. So let's actually go with that example. How do we use a method to say calculate the tip for a meal? So let's do that. Right? So we have a double set, right? So we're going to say this double is called meal cost. We're going to say the meal is $300 or $350. We'll say, actually no, let's kind of just give it a random number here. $54.65, okay? Right? So we have that as our meal cost. Now we want to find, let's say we want to find a 16% tip. Or, well, to make it simple, let's say a 10% tip, right? So double percent equals 0.10, right? So this is a 10% tip. And we want to system out print. We want to print whatever the tip is. So tip will be colon space plus calculate tip. And we pass it the meal cost and the percentage. Right? So we don't have a calculate tip method created yet. So let's go ahead and do that. We want this to return a double because we actually want to return what our tip amount is going to be. How do we do this? Well, let's go ahead and say public static double. You could also do private, so let's actually go ahead and do that. So private static double. And we'll, of course, call this calculate tip. And this will take a double cost and a double percent. Okay. And all we need to do is we need to simply return the cost times the percent. And this will get us whatever, say, 15% of whatever the cost is, or 10% of whatever the cost is, so on and so forth, and it will return that. So we save this, then we go ahead and run this. You can see we get this number, 5.465. Now, there are certain ways in Java that you can format strings and format results and whatnot to output as a formatted string for currency, degrees, that kind of stuff. But we're not going to cover that in this tutorial series because that's different parts of the JDK that isn't part of the actual language itself, and this series is just about the language itself. If you want me to create a couple videos on how to format strings and whatnot to represent a certain amount of decimal places and currency and degrees and all that stuff, let me know and I'll do that, but for now we're not going to cover that. Now, that's one thing, but what if we said we want to find 10% of 100? I can find my cursor. Let's change the value of meal cost to 100. We save this. And then we run it. Tip will be $10. Exactly what we expected it to be. Now, of course, you don't have to put static in front of your method names, or in your method stubs. But in this case, we have to, because static is a required keyword if you're going to call a method inside of the public static void main method directly. So that's something, but in most cases you don't have to put static. I personally, in my Java projects, will use static for utility methods because I don't want to create a separate object for utilities. I just want to be able to call those methods directly, and that's what a use case for static is usually. So that basically does it for methods. I told you we had a lot to cover. Parameters, no parameters, return types with parameters, return types without parameters. You know, that kind of stuff. I know we didn't touch on everything in detail, but what I really want you guys to do is I want you guys to go ahead and create a program that I want you to create a program that has a method that takes in an array of values, specifically doubles, okay? Because I want this to be any wide range of values. I want you to create a method that takes in an array of doubles, loops through that array, and then finds the mean, median. Well, we don't want median, so we're just going to say the mean, as in the average. We want to find the average of all of those values, return that, and then print it to the screen. That's what we want. That's what I want you to do. Create a program that finds the average of an array of doubles and print it to the screen using a method that will return a double. So, that's your task. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video. See ya.